What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 54 of the Book Binge, where this week we're once again talking about a little bit more Sun Eater with Queen Amid Ashes and Other Stories by Christopher Ruocchio, this being a collection of the novella Queen Amid Ashes, obviously, as well as Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 2. I have covered basically everything that I've read of the series up to this point already, even including Demon in White, which I covered last week, which was a book that I really enjoyed. Um, how about we do something a little bit shorter this week, obviously, because the novella is quite short, and then it's a collection of a few short stories otherwise. Starting off, just as normal, with The Good of Queen Amid Ashes. One of the things that I appreciate, I think, the most about Queen Amid Ashes itself, being the independent novella, is that it gives an upfront view of, I think, the desolation that the Sealson as a species can cause in the universe of the Sun Eater, a more upfront vision of it than we've seen really up to that point in the series, at least assuming you have read the book in chronological order. Meaning that if you read Queen of Mid-Ashes right after Howling Dark and before anything afterwards, the only real amounts of destruction and decimation, or decimation's not the right word, as Rockio would be keen to tell you, the annihilation that you would see up to this point in the series is a little bit of something briefly seen early on in Howling Dark, I believe, is probably the closest you get to the damage that the Sealson can cause. But even then, you don't really get to see that firsthand in a strong sense because you're going to a different part of the world where it's not quite as evident. If I'm remembering correctly, the being in the first few chapters of Howling Dark. However, Queen of Mid-Ashes takes place on a planet that has been pretty much totally and utterly destroyed by the Sealson. You see that in a way that you haven't really seen in the series, like I said, up to this point yet, and I really appreciate that element because it really makes you understand how really unfeeling in a way the Sealson as a species really are, and that's something that I really like about that. Just the way that Rockio has written the dynamic between humans and this other alien species that are humanoid, but definitely not human. I think the other thing that I appreciate the most about Queen of Mid-Ashes as well, being self-contained, is that it deals with certain thematic story elements, I guess, along a certain form of betrayal or corruption type of sense that I don't recall being in the rest of the series to this type of degree. I mean, I think you can see elements of that in Demon in White, but they appear in much different ways than they make their appearance in Queen of Mid-Ashes. So that's something that's a little bit fun as well. Just the way that Queen of Mid-Ashes deals with that particular topic and the way that Hadrian specifically confronts it is one of the better parts of the book for sure. But we're going to move on to what I think is the bad of Queen of Mid-Ashes, but I will preface this section saying that I think I'm very much in the minority of this, with this opinion on Queen of Mid-Ashes. I think Queen of Mid-Ashes is probably my least favorite of all of the writings within the Sun Eater up to this point. I mean, there might be one or two pieces in Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 2 that are at that level or maybe just slightly below. But when it comes right down to it, I have, like I said, I believe it is a very unpopular opinion in regards to Queen of Mid-Ashes because basically everybody else who I know who has read it adores this thing to pieces just as much or more than they enjoy pretty much everything else in Sun Eater. So I think it might be a me problem more than anything. Like I said, super unpopular opinion, at least not a common one. So when I talk about these things that I didn't enjoy as much about Queen of Mid-Ashes, take that with a grain of salt, that it might not apply to you or really anybody else. Is just how I felt about it. My main problem with Queen of Mid-Ashes is with its length and I guess to a certain extent the pacing with the length as well. If it had been shorter, I think it could have been a really amazing short story or rather a novelette. So something that maybe could have been a couple chapters, maybe even a few chapters shorter and have lost relatively little and been really good in the way that several of these short stories, like from Tales of Sun Eater Volume 1, for example, that I really enjoyed were. And if it had been longer, it could have been a much better novella. I just think it is somehow, I don't exactly know why it is that I feel this way. I just think that for whatever reason, Queen of Mid-Ashes is simultaneously too long and too short for what it's trying to do. So, like I said, it's definitely mostly a me problem, I think. Maybe I just need to reread it at some point, take a few days and do that, and see if I enjoy it more on a second go round because of maybe I had subconsciously let my expectations get the better of me to the point that everybody else's adoration of this piece of work made it so that I didn't enjoy it as much because I was expecting it to meet those heights. But I don't think that was the problem, but maybe I'll give it a reread and see at some point. Also, one thing that I think I should note for The Ugly of Queen of Mid-Ashes is the fact that I think it has a chapter. It might have been chapter 3. I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly. Um, chapters 3 and 4 I think are probably the chapters that I'm thinking of somewhere in that section of Queen of Mid-Ashes has some of the most brutal imagery in the entire series up to this point. Like I said, as long as you're reading chronologically. Demon in White has some stuff that comes pretty close to that, if not worse, probably worse, in terms of the spook or brutal category of things. But Queen of Mid-Ashes up to this point, as long as you read it right after Howling Dark, absolutely has the most brutal imagery that the series has seen up to that point. And that is my thoughts on Queen of Mid-Ashes. I'm more mixed on it than I wish I was. All things considered, I wish I hadn't been quite so mixed on it. But, that's fine. It's nothing that I'm going to complain about too much because even the worst of Sun Eater is better than plenty of the other stuff that I read, say, in 2022. So that takes us into our discussion of Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 2. There are a few short stories. I'm going to talk about them all a little bit, very briefly, independently. Starting off with The Dragon Slayers, the first story in the collection, which I thought was a very epic and fun tale, exploring a somewhat different tone, I believe, than several of the other stories have, given it having a different cast of characters that are, all things considered, a lot lower in the hierarchy, I guess, of things within the series than many of the other tales have done. I thought it was really solid, easily a 4 out of 5 for me. The next story in the collection was Fire in the Sky, that I believe had some really cool elements in it, but I think it was definitely a bit too short. I would have loved for this one to go for an extra like 15 to 20 pages in this special edition collection. I believe the story was 15 or 20 pages. I think it could have gone for another 15 or 20 beyond that and tacked on, specifically taken longer at the end, explored a little bit more with what happens after the end of the actual story, that I think would have been more enjoyable to see and actually be able to get some of that in there. What's in the story is good, but I definitely think it needed more. I'm going to give Fire in the Sky 3.5 out of 5 personally. Moving on to Kill the King, the next tale in the collection, being a very good story as well, similar to the Dragon Slayers, one that I really enjoyed, but this one was a bit on the longer side. It came close to doing things in ways that made me love Parliament of Owls from Tales Volume 1 so much, which if you watched that review or even read my review on that one, you know that I adore Parliament of Owls. It's one of, if not my favorite thing in Sun Eater up to this point. There was a fun twist, or even two, within Kill the King that got even a bit spook and had a much, much more dismal ending than I expected it to have. I really enjoyed Kill the King. Easily a 4.5 out of 5, but probably a 5 out of 5. Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and give it a 5 out of 5 retroactively. I'm moving on to Knowledge, which is a very short story. I think it's 4 or 5 pages in this collection, so it's like tiny. It's like very brief. It's not a story so much as it is exploring like a theme, I guess, and that theme is very philosophical in nature. It's too short to really say much about it otherwise, but like I said, the amount of philosophy that is packed into just a couple pages in this is commendable, plus a brief reappearance of a character that I personally love made it really nice. So it's very short and sweet. I would say it's either a 4.5 or sorry, a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5, but it's kind of hard to give it a specific score because of such brevity. Moving on to the last two stories in the collection, which are both very good. First up is Good Intentions, being one from Valka's point of view, a story involving Valka is one that I've been wanting up to this point. We see her plenty in the main series, yes, but seeing something of her independently was something that I really wanted, and getting it in Good Intentions was a very nice thing. Being able to be in her head, so to speak, for pretty much the first time truly was great. I really liked this story. It was super cool. And I think it had a lot of emotional gut punch as well for just being about 20 pages. Easy 5 out of 5 for me. And then the last story in the collection being The Four Devils. If you enjoyed The Lesser Devil, the first novella that Ruocchio wrote for this, if you enjoyed The Lesser Devil, there's very little reason, I think, to dislike The Four Devils. In fact, More Crispin to me was very fun because I loved The Lesser Devil, and the character interactions are all very interesting in some of the topics and the things that are involved with the story specifically. I just wish that it could have been, to an extent, in Tales Volume 1 rather than Volume 2, and especially at the end of Volume 2, based on timeline stuff. The Four Devils being a story involving Crispin and some of those other similar characters, I would have expected for it to take place much later in the timeline based on it being in Volume 2. That's obviously not a knock on the story, just something that felt a little bit whiplashy to a small extent. But I will absolutely wish for more stories with these characters set later in time in the Sun Eater universe, because that would be something that I would really love. The Four Devils also gets a 5 out of 5 for me. In terms of my recommendation, well, just like as I was likely to say with everything else Sun Eater related, definitely read Queen of Mid-Ashes and Tales Volume 2, and I absolutely recommend reading them in Ruocchio's recommended order himself, which is obviously Empire of Silence, The Lesser Devil, Howling Dark, Queen of Mid-Ashes, Tales Volume 1, Demon in White, Tales Volume 2, and then Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man. That's the recommended order that he gave that I have been reading them in, and I think it's worked very well for me. In my opinion, I would go ahead and I would make the assertion that Queen of Mid-Ashes and Tales Volume 2 are probably the two weakest of the works within the Sun Eater universe, like I said, in my opinion. But just as I said earlier, the worst Sun Eater is still better than plenty of the other stuff that I read in 2022. But like I said with Queen of Mid-Ashes, I think it is a somewhat unpopular opinion. Not very many people share my opinion on this one, at least up to the point that I've seen most everybody adores it. So I absolutely recommend giving them both shots for yourself because they're both great. Everything that Ruocchio has written is great, and I think it's just a me problem in terms of my not enjoying Queen of Mid-Ashes as much. I think I just need to reread it so that I'm on the same page as everybody else. I think I'm the one that's in the wrong here. I can't wait for novella number 3, whatever that's going to be, as well as Tales Volume 3, which could possibly both be coming this year. I'm pretty sure Ruocchio has more or less confirmed that Tales Volume 3 is going to come out this year. I think. I'm pretty sure he said that, so long as he finishes book 6 on time. He just has to write a few more stories for part 3. But I guess we'll see what happens with all of that. Whatever comes out for Sun Eater, I will absolutely be reading next. I'm probably going to try to do as close to day one releases for Sun Eater stuff in the future as I can, because I've just enjoyed all of it so much. With that all being said, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate the support and all of the insane amount of watch time I've gotten in January, the amount of interaction that my channel has gotten this month, compared to even my most popular months in 2022, has been really mind-blowing and insane, and I really appreciate everybody for that. If you are interested, please consider reading my novella that I finished editing just recently. Literally, it is all published right now. I believe the last chapter and the epilogue just published this previous Friday, as long as I have my timeline all correct. So if you're interested for that, it is absolutely there at seasonalproductions.com/beneath-perfection, I believe is the correct link. Even if it is not, I will have the correct link down below in the description if you are willing to check that out. I would very much appreciate that, because I'm actually very happy with that, how that one turned out. Like I said, if you're interested, it is there. But thank you guys again for watching. I'll be back again on Thursday for more tier listing of the books that I read in 2022, and next Tuesday for another review of a similar format to this one. I'll see you guys then.